The void between stars has always been silent, but tonight it trembled. Out in the black, past the broken hulls of ruined colonies and the fading cries of dying fleets, something stirred. It wasn't the Empire's patrols, nor the endless swarms that once darkened Earth's skies. It was older, quieter, and infinitely more dangerous. It was the ship they had buried in silence, the one whispered about in half-forgotten legends, the Black Ship. For decades, humanity had limped along under the shadow of the alien empire. Once proud, once defiant, they now scattered across shattered worlds, reduced to refugees drifting from one desolate rock to another. The battles had been lost long ago. Cities had burned, oceans had boiled, and Earth itself was nothing more than a tomb wrapped in radioactive clouds. And yet, in the ruins, something had survived. A weapon not built by the aliens. Not even built for them. It was built for us. By us. The last desperate gamble of a species cornered by extinction. Few remembered its name. Fewer dared to speak of it. But in the hidden corners of what was left of humanity's colonies, whispers spread. Some called it a ghost, others a curse. But among the most desperate, it was called by its true name, the Black Ship. It had been hidden when humanity fell, buried deep where the aliens could not find it. No one knew why it hadn't been unleashed in the final war. No one knew if it had been too dangerous or too broken. All they knew was this: the ship had returned. On a dead moon orbiting a nameless gas giant, a handful of survivors gathered in the ruins of an abandoned listening post. Their faces were hardened by hunger, their bodies thinned by years of running, but in their eyes flickered something that hadn't been seen in generations: hope. They had intercepted the signal. Weak at first, distorted by radiation storms, but unmistakable. It wasn't alien. It wasn't anything the Empire had used before. It was human, a code buried so deep in Earth's lost archives that only the old resistance could recognize it. The Black Ship was awake. No one knew how, no one knew why, but its engines had fired in the dark, and its signal had reached them. A ship that wasn't supposed to exist anymore, a relic from a war long lost, had stirred again. And with it came a dangerous question. Had humanity's last forgotten arsenal truly returned, or was this another trap, another cruel trick by the Empire to flush out survivors? Even the survivors themselves couldn't agree. Some saw salvation, others saw doom. But all of them knew one thing: the aliens feared the ship. They had spent decades scouring the void for it, searching every hidden asteroid, every broken vault, every derelict station. For the Empire, the Black Ship was unfinished business, a weapon too dangerous to ignore, too powerful to leave behind. Now, after all these years, it had answered back. Deep inside the ship's shadowed halls, lights flickered for the first time in centuries. Rusted consoles blinked alive, data streams cascaded across cracked screens, and ancient weapons hummed with restrained energy. The Black Ship wasn't just steel and circuits. It carried within it the rage of a dying species, the brilliance of engineers who refused to kneel, and the desperation of soldiers who knew they would never live to see victory. It was more than a vessel. It was a tomb, a promise, and a curse. Outside in the ruins of forgotten space, the Empire had already noticed. Their scanners had caught the faint ignition, the tremor of an engine that did not belong to them. In their command halls, cold voices whispered of old dangers, and fleets began to shift. What the humans celebrated as hope, the aliens regarded as a spark that had to be extinguished before it grew into fire. And so, two forces moved toward the same point in the void. The survivors, ragged but determined, desperate to reach the ship before the Empire's fleets arrived. And the aliens, merciless and unyielding, determined to crush whatever humanity dared to awaken. Between them floated the Black Ship, silent and watching, as though waiting to choose its own side. But ships don't choose. People do. Among the survivors, a leader emerged, not because of rank, but because of resolve. This one carried the memory of Earth burned into their heart, the screams of family lost to the first waves of invasion. They were tired of running, tired of hiding, tired of living as prey. When they saw the signal, they knew it wasn't just a relic calling. It was a chance. the last chance humanity would ever get. The group set out across the void in a patched freighter, its hull scarred and its systems barely functional. Each hour brought them closer to the black ship, and each hour the tension grew heavier. They knew the Empire was coming. They knew they might be flying straight into a trap, and yet none turned back. Because for the first time in years, they had a direction. For the first time in years, they weren't running away. They were running towards something. When the freighter finally broke into the ship's orbit, the sight left them in silence. The black ship drifted like a shadow against the stars, its surface scarred but unbroken, its outline jagged and alien, yet undeniably human in design. It was massive, larger than anything humanity had built since the fall. And it was awake. Docking was a risk. Entering was madness. But the survivors had already made their choice. Inside, the air was thin and stale but breathable. Lights flickered on in corridors untouched for centuries. The walls hummed faintly, as if the ship itself recognized their presence. Step by step, they moved deeper into its heart, guided by faint beacons that lit just ahead of them. It felt alive, watching, testing, as though the ship wanted to know who had come to wake it. In the command chamber, they found it, the core, pulsing with quiet energy. And there, in the silence, a voice emerged. Not human, not alien, something in between. A voice woven from recorded fragments of humanity itself. An echo of countless engineers, soldiers, and leaders who had died to build this vessel. It spoke only one line. "Are you ready to finish what was started?" The survivors froze. Their leader stepped forward, breath shallow, heart hammering. They had no answer yet. Because even as the ship asked, alarms echoed through the hull. Outside, in the darkness, alien warships were already arriving, their weapons locking on target, their engines burning bright. The black ship had returned. But whether it would save humanity or destroy what was left of it remained unknown. And as the survivors stared at the awakening arsenal, with enemy fleets closing in, they realized one truth: the real war hadn't ended. It had only been waiting. The alarms reverberated through the chamber, a low pulse that seemed to shake the very air. The survivors exchanged uneasy glances, their breaths shallow as they tried to process what they had awakened. The black ship stood before them, alive in ways no ordinary vessel should be. Its walls pulsed faintly as though blood coursed through hidden veins. Every flicker of light, every vibration, carried with it a presence that felt both protective and dangerous. The voice that had spoken still echoed in their ears. "Are you ready to finish what was started?" None of them dared answer. Some shifted uneasily, wondering if this was a warning. Others clenched their fists, determined that this was the sign humanity had been waiting for. The leader among them, quiet but steady, placed a hand on the console. It was cold to the touch, yet it seemed to hum in response. Behind them, the freighter's pilot muttered under their breath, eyes flicking to the scanners. "They're here. No one needed clarification." They all knew who they were. The alien empire had moved swiftly as they always did. Entire star systems had been burned to silence when even the faintest hint of resistance appeared. The survivors had seen colonies erased in a matter of hours. And now, those same warships gathered outside the black ship, positioning themselves like predators circling prey. Yet strangely, the enemy hadn't fired. Not yet. They were waiting, watching, almost as if they feared what might happen if they struck too soon. That hesitation spoke louder than weapons fire ever could. The leader turned to their group. "This ship isn't just a relic. It's a warning. The Empire knows it. That's why they've chased its shadow for so long. And now, it's awake." No one argued, though fear tightened their faces. They needed answers. Why had the black ship been hidden when humanity had needed it most? Why was it stirring now after so many years of silence? The mysteries clung to every surface of the vessel. Moving deeper into the command chamber, they found rows of consoles that had not been touched since Earth's final days. Dust clung to the corners, yet the systems powered up one by one as though eager to be used again. Holographic displays flickered into being, maps of old battlefields where humanity had once fought for survival. Entire fleets long gone hovered in shimmering light, frozen mid-strike. It was like stepping into a memory. One of the younger survivors studied the displays with wide eyes. It kept records. All of it, every battle, every loss. Their voice cracked with a mixture of awe and sorrow. It remembers everything. The leader frowned, realizing the weight of what they had uncovered. The black ship wasn't just a weapon. It was a witness. A tomb carrying not just firepower, but memory. Every decision, every sacrifice made in those final desperate years was stored within its core. And yet, the greatest mystery remained. Why hadn't it fought? Why had this arsenal been locked away when humanity had been on its knees? The answer came, not through words, but through images. The ship's systems responded to their unspoken questions, projecting fragments of its own history. Engineers in hidden facilities, working in shadows as the skies above Earth burned. Soldiers carrying supplies underground while orbital bombardments rained down. Voices crying out promises that this weapon would be the last, the one thing that could shift the war. But then came silence. The recordings ended abruptly, leaving a void where the truth should have been. The leader clenched their jaw. Something had happened. Something that had forced the ship into sleep instead of war. And whatever that reason was, it had been buried along with it. Outside, the alien warships edged closer. The scanners showed them forming a net, cutting off escape routes, their movements deliberate and patient. It was clear they had no intention of allowing the survivors to leave. But the Empire still didn't strike. They wanted the ship intact. They wanted it silenced before it could be used. The survivors argued in hushed voices. Some wanted to flee while there was still time, to abandon this cursed vessel and hide in the shadows again. Others refused, saying there was nothing left to run to. This ship was their only chance, their last hope of striking back. The leader let them speak, but their decision was already forming. Every instinct screamed that the black ship wasn't just a relic, it was waiting for them to choose. Waiting for humanity to stop hiding and take back the fire that had once made them dangerous. But trust came hard. The ship had asked if they were ready to finish what was started, yet it had given no promises. Could they truly rely on something they didn't understand? Could they place their survival in a machine built for war, a machine that might consume them just as easily as it destroyed their enemies? They turned back to the console, staring at the faint glow that pulsed beneath their palm. "If you were meant to save us," they whispered, "why didn't you?" The chamber lights dimmed. For a moment, it felt as if the ship had heard the question. Then faintly, another image appeared. Not of battles, not of soldiers, but of leaders standing in a hidden chamber, voices urgent, faces grim. Their words were muted, fragmented, but the survivors could read the tension in their movements. Something had gone wrong. Something about the ship itself. And then, as suddenly as it appeared, the image vanished. The survivors looked to one another, unease gnawing deeper than ever. The ship had been hidden for a reason, and now that it was awake, that reason threatened to surface. Yet, before they could argue further, the alarms shifted. A different tone, sharper, urgent. The alien warships were moving again, this time more aggressively. Scanners lit up with warnings as the fleet began charging their weapons. The patience had ended. The leader's voice cut through the rising panic. "We can't run." "Not anymore. If this ship is truly ours, then it's time to see if it will fight with us or against us." They reached for the console, and for the first time, the black ship responded directly. Panels lit up in sequence, weapons systems hummed to life, and the entire vessel trembled with power that had been dormant for generations. The survivors clung to their stations as energy surged through the decks, rattling the very structure of the ship. And yet, the mystery only deepened. Because as the weapons came online, more fragments of memory spilled into the displays. Plans of battles never fought, weapons never deployed, enemies never struck. It was as if the ship had been built not just as a weapon, but as a last question to humanity itself. What price were they willing to pay for survival? Outside, the alien fleet tightened its grip, their weapons now locked onto the black ship. Inside, the survivors stood at the edge of history, unsure if they were about to awaken salvation or unleash something far worse. The leader stared at the screens, the hum of the arsenal surrounding them like a storm. Every heartbeat felt heavier, every second stretched thin. They could almost hear the voices of those who had built this ship. whispering across the years, and then in the silence before the first shot was fired, the black ship spoke again. "Choice is not without cost." The words sank into them, cold and heavy. None of them knew what it meant. None of them had time to ask. Because in the next instant, the alien warships opened fire, and the void lit up with fire brighter than any sun. The void outside the black ship erupted in light. Alien warships unleashed streams of fire, their weapons cutting through the darkness like blades of white heat. The survivors braced themselves, expecting the vessel to shatter, to collapse under the kind of punishment that had erased whole colonies. But instead, the ship absorbed it. Shields dormant for centuries flared to life, bending and distorting the energy before dissolving it into harmless sparks. The walls hummed louder, as if the ship was waking further with every strike. Inside the command chamber, fear turned to awe. The youngest of the group gripped the console so tightly their knuckles went pale. "It's holding," they whispered, almost afraid to believe it. The leader didn't answer. Their gaze was fixed on the displays, watching as the alien fleet closed in. The black ship had power, that much was clear, but power alone would not be enough. The Empire's fleets were endless, their reach across the stars absolute. To fight here, to reveal this arsenal, meant there was no turning back, yet the choice was already made. With a low vibration, the ship's weapons came online. Gigantic batteries unfolded from hidden ports, glowing faintly as energy surged through them. The survivors exchanged uneasy glances. None of them had touched a single control. The ship was preparing to fight on its own. "Are we in control?" someone asked, voice sharp with panic. The leader shook their head. "No, we're passengers." The first counterstrike came a moment later. From the black ship's hull, a beam of concentrated fire cut through the void, slicing an alien cruiser in half. The survivors flinched as the explosion lit the chamber in a cold flash, debris scattering across the dark. The Empire's fleet shifted instantly, abandoning patience for fury. Waves of ships descended, weapons flaring, but even as the black ship fought back, tension twisted inside the survivors. If this vessel could fight without them, what role did they truly play? Were they allies to it, or merely the sparks that had woken something they could no longer command? The leader's mind churned. The voice that had spoken to them, the warnings about choice and cost, rang louder with each passing moment. This wasn't just a ship built to destroy. It was something more, something layered with intention that none of them yet understood. As battle raged outside, fragments of memory continued to bleed into the displays. They showed glimpses of the ship's creation, not just the engineers and soldiers, but the debates, the arguments, the divisions among humanity itself. Some had believed the ship would be salvation. Others had feared it would turn into their executioner. That conflict had been buried, sealed away in silence. And now, the survivors stood in the same position, forced to wrestle with the same doubt. One of them, older and wearier than the rest, spoke up. Maybe they hid it because they were afraid of it. Maybe this thing doesn't belong to us anymore. The words settled like ice. No one replied, but the thought lingered. What if the black ship wasn't humanity's weapon, but something else entirely? Meanwhile, outside, the conflict escalated. Alien ships pressed closer, swarming like predators, each one focusing fire on weak points the survivors couldn't even see. Yet the black ship's defenses adapted with uncanny precision. Shields shifted where they were needed, weapons targeted with inhuman accuracy. It was as though the vessel anticipated every move before it came, but inside, not all eyes were on the battle. One of the younger survivors had wandered away from the command chamber, drawn by a faint hum deeper in the corridors. The walls glowed softly, guiding their steps like a trail. They hesitated, torn between duty and curiosity, but something about the rhythm of that hum felt personal, almost like a heartbeat. Against better judgment, they followed. The corridors twisted downward until they reached a chamber unlike any they had seen. It wasn't filled with weapons or consoles. It was filled with pods, hundreds of them lined against the walls in eerie silence. The survivor pressed closer, wiping frost from the glass of one pod, and froze. Inside, preserved perfectly, was a human face. They stumbled back, breath catching in their throat. These weren't machines. They were people. Not alive, but not dead either, suspended in some kind of stasis, their faces etched with the same exhaustion the survivors themselves carried. Why were they here? Who were they? And why had the ship kept them hidden? The survivors' hands shook as they activated a console beside the pods. A fragment of data appeared, scrambled but clear enough to read. Crew preserved for final awakening. Release contingent on decision. Decision. The word echoed. Decision of what? The survivor hurried back toward the command chamber, but the revelation burned in their mind. This ship wasn't just a weapon. It was a graveyard of choices, a prison of possibilities. When they returned, the battle was still raging, but the leader noticed their shaken expression. "What did you see?" "People," they whispered. "The ship has people inside it, waiting." The chamber went silent. For a moment, even the alarms seemed distant. The implications were staggering. This wasn't just humanity's arsenal. It carried its last soldiers, locked away in time. And the ship was waiting for someone to decide whether they should be woken. Before the survivors could process this, the displays lit up again. A new image appeared, an alien command vessel moving into range. Larger than the others, bristling with weapons, its arrival shifted the balance of battle. The survivors knew what it meant. The Empire had sent a true executioner. The leader clenched their fists. They had no illusions about the odds. The black ship was powerful, but not invincible. Against an entire fleet, even it could be broken. And yet, for the first time, the aliens showed hesitation. Their movements, though precise, carried an edge of caution. They feared what the ship might unleash if pushed too far, and maybe that fear was the greatest weapon of all. But inside, the survivors' arguments grew sharper. Some insisted they wake the preserved crew, that humanity's soldiers should be given the chance to fight again. Others argued it would be a mistake, that waking them without knowing the ship's true purpose might bring disaster. The conflict between them deepened, mirroring the very divisions that had once silenced the black ship before. As the debate raged, the leader stood apart, staring at the console where the ship's voice had spoken. The words weighed heavily. "Choice is not without cost." The leader finally spoke, voice steady despite the storm around them. "This ship doesn't just fight, it tests us. Everything it shows, everything it hides. It's waiting to see what kind of people we still are. Whether we're worthy of it, or whether we'll destroy ourselves all over again." The others fell silent, unsettled. Because deep down, each of them knew the truth. Humanity's greatest enemy had never only been the Empire. It had been itself, the divisions, the distrust, the desperate hunger for survival at any cost. And now, with alien warships closing in and the preserved crew still locked in silence, the survivors were about to face the same test their ancestors had failed. Outside, the alien command vessel's weapons began to charge, light building across its massive hull. Inside, the survivors stood divided, torn between fear and hope, unsure whether the black ship was salvation, curse, or mirror. The leader gripped the console tighter, heart pounding as the voice of the ship lingered in the silence of their thoughts. Choice was coming. And when it did, the cost would be more than any of them were ready to pay. The chamber shook violently as the first volley from the alien flagship struck the shields. The lights flickered, systems roared to life, and the black ship responded with a surge of power so immense it felt like the void itself was trembling. The battle had only begun. But the war, the true war, was just awakening. The black ship shook under the weight of the alien flagship's assault, its shields flaring in brilliant arcs that cast shadows across the command chamber. Every impact rattled the survivors, but the ship held. Systems groaned, energy surged, and the walls pulsed with light as though the vessel itself was bracing for the storm. Outside, the alien fleet pressed closer, tightening its grip. The void burned with streaks of fire, a battlefield drawn across the stars. Inside, the survivors argued with voices rising above the alarms. Some demanded the frozen crew be awakened. "They built this ship. They trained for it. This is their fight, not ours." Others shouted back that the risk was too great. "We don't know why they were sealed away. What if they're dangerous? What if they failed before and that's why the ship was hidden?" The leaders stood apart, silent, their gaze fixed on the console that pulsed beneath their hand. Each vibration carried weight, as if the ship itself was listening, waiting for them to speak. But the leader said nothing. The cost of choice pressed too heavily, and no answer felt safe. Another strike hit the shields, this one harder. Sparks burst from a panel above, raining onto the floor. A survivor yelped, ducking back as systems struggled to reroute. "We can't take much more of this!" The pilot shouted, voice cracking. The black ship's response was immediate. Its weapons roared, firing in a coordinated storm that tore through 3 alien cruisers at once. The survivors staggered as the shock waves echoed through the hull. The power was breathtaking, terrifying, like holding a sun in their hands. Yet for all its strength, the enemy did not falter. For every ship destroyed, more pressed forward. The Empire had committed fully now, determined to end this awakening before it spread hope too far. The younger survivor, the one who had found the frozen crew, clenched their fists. "They're waiting for us. Don't you see? This ship doesn't want to fight alone. It's testing us, waiting for us to take our place." But the older voice, bitter and tired, cut back. "Or it's waiting for us to fail again. Maybe that's why it never joined the war before, because it knew humanity wasn't ready." The words stung, because they carried truth. Humanity had fallen, not just from alien fire, but from within. Division, mistrust, fear. The Empire hadn't needed to break them, because they had broken themselves. And now, those same divisions cracked through the survivors in this chamber, threatening to repeat history. The leader's heart pounded as they wrestled with the silence of decision. Every instinct screamed that action was needed. Every fear whispered that the wrong action could doom them all. And through it all, the ship's voice lingered in their memory. Choice is not without cost. The lights dimmed, then flared again. A new sequence activated on the consoles, one none of them had touched. The ship projected an image into the chamber, a map of the battlefield. The alien flagship glowed red, pulsing brighter than the rest. A new option appeared, marked in burning gold: release. The survivors stared, realization crashing into them. The ship was offering them a choice. They could awaken the frozen crew, bring them into the fight. But once chosen, there would be no turning back. The pilots shook their head violently. "No, we don't even know who they are." "What if they don't fight for us?" The younger survivor stepped forward, voice fierce. "And what if they do? We're outnumbered, outgunned, and running out of time. We can't hold this ship alone. We have to trust them." The argument ignited into chaos, voices clashing as the alien fleet pounded harder against the shields. The black ship trembled, its power immense but stretched to its limits. Outside, the Empire's flagship prepared its next strike, energy building across its colossal frame. The leader raised a hand, silencing the chamber. Their voice was low, steady, but carried through the storm. "This isn't just about survival. It's about who we are. If we wake them, we risk everything. If we don't, we may not live long enough to regret it." The words hung in the air, a blade drawn but not swung. No one answered. The choice loomed heavier than the battle itself. Then, without warning, the black ship spoke again, its voice deep and resonant, filling every corner of the chamber. "Humanity is never without choice, but every choice shapes the end." The survivors froze, their fear sharpened into silence. The ship had spoken directly, no longer through fragments of memory, but as something alive, something aware. The leader's hand hovered over the console. Every nerve screamed at them to decide. But before they could act, the chamber shook violently. The alien flagship had fired its superweapon. A torrent of energy streaked across the void, slamming into the black ship's shields, with force so great the entire vessel shuddered. Systems flickered, alarms screamed, and for the first time, the shields wavered. Sparks flew across the chamber as consoles overloaded. Survivors scrambled to hold their stations, their voices lost in the roar of collapsing systems. The black ship reeled, its immense power straining against the tide. For a moment, it looked as though the Empire's fire would finally shatter it. Then, in a surge of blinding light, the black ship retaliated, its weapons unleashed in a fury unlike anything the survivors had yet seen. Beams lanced through the fleet, ripping cruisers apart, tearing destroyers into fragments of fire. The void burned brighter than a star, filled with the wrath of a vessel that refused to die. But even as alien ships fell, the flagship endured. Its shields flared, its weapons charged again, relentless in its purpose. The battle was building toward a single, inevitable collision, two titans locked in a storm of fire, neither willing to yield. Inside, the survivors felt the weight of the moment press down harder than the gravity of any world. They were standing on the knife's edge of history. If they chose wrong now, there would be no second chance. The younger survivor's voice broke through the chaos, raw and desperate. "Leader, if you don't decide, the ship will decide for us." The leader's eyes locked on the glowing option on the console, release. Their breath caught, chest tight, as the ship's voice whispered again, softer this time. "The future demands your answer." Another strike slammed the ship, shaking the chamber so violently the survivors were thrown from their feet. Systems flared, lights dimmed, and the shields screamed under the pressure. The Empire was not giving them time. The leader rose slowly, every muscle trembling, and placed their hand on the console. The survivors watched, hearts pounding as the option pulsed brighter, waiting for the command that could alter the fate of everything. Outside, the alien flagship loomed larger, its superweapon charging once more. Inside, the ship itself seemed to hold its breath. And in that razor-thin moment between survival and annihilation, the choice hovered unspoken. The tension stretched to breaking, the future suspended in silence. The battle roared. The decision burned, and the climax drew near. The leader's hand hovered over the console, the golden option pulsing like a heartbeat. The survivors held their breath, the chamber vibrating with the tension of both battle and decision. Outside, the alien flagship glowed with the energy of its charging weapon, ready to unleash another strike that could finally crush the black ship. Inside, every second stretched thin, every sound magnified, the hiss of failing systems, the distant groan of the hull, the pounding of their own hearts. And then, before the leader could act, the black ship did something no one expected. The golden option on the console dimmed, replaced by something new. A second choice appeared, glowing in cold blue light. The word burned across the screen: surrender. The survivors froze, disbelief washing over them. "What is this?" one of them shouted, voice sharp with panic. The leader stared, unable to move. The black ship wasn't just offering them a path forward, it was dividing the choice. Fight with the awakened crew, or surrender. The younger survivor's face twisted with anger. "It's a trick. The ship's testing us. It wants to know if we'll bow, just like before." But the older survivor's voice cut through the chamber, bitter and cold. "Or maybe it knows the truth. We can't win this. We never could. And maybe the only way humanity survives is by bending instead of breaking." The words stung. They carried the weight of every failure, every retreat, every memory of humanity crushed under alien fire. The Empire had not just destroyed their worlds, it had broken their will. Surrender was a word etched into their history. And now, the ship itself was daring them to choose it. Outside, the alien fleet shifted as though sensing the ship's hesitation. The flagship's superweapon pulsed brighter, its energy field now a blazing sphere. The enemy wasn't waiting much longer. The leader's chest tightened. Why would the black ship offer surrender? It was built to fight, designed as humanity's last arsenal. And yet, its systems now tempted them with a path of submission. It made no sense, unless this was another part of the test. Unless surrender had been the choice humanity had made before, the reason the ship had never joined the war. The younger survivor's voice cracked as they stepped closer. "Don't you see? This is why the ship was hidden. Because the people before us couldn't decide. They hesitated, they argued, and they chose nothing. That's why humanity fell." The leader's mind raced. The ship wasn't a weapon alone. It was a mirror, reflecting back the divisions that had once doomed their kind. And now, in the middle of the battle, it was forcing them to face the same fracture again. But before any decision could be reached, another shockwave slammed into the hull. The alien flagship had fired, not its main weapon, but a volley of piercing rounds designed to break the shields. The black ship staggered, sparks raining from the ceiling. Alarms wailed. Panels burst open. For the first time, the vessel's defenses faltered. The survivors clung to their stations, panic rising. One shouted above the noise, "Shields dropping! We can't take another hit like that!" The leader gritted their teeth, torn between choices, when the ship itself shifted again. The walls glowed faintly, and another vision projected into the chamber. This time it wasn't a memory of the past. It was a transmission. The survivors gasped as alien symbols filled the air, their meaning translated instantly into human language. It was a message from the Empire itself, broadcast directly to the black ship. "Surrender, and you will be spared. Resist, and you will be erased." The room fell into a suffocating silence. The aliens weren't just attacking, they were speaking to the survivors directly. They knew humans were aboard. They wanted them to see this offer. The older survivors' eyes filled with weary resignation. "They'll let us live if we bow. That's more than anyone else ever got." The younger survivors shook their head fiercely. "No. They'll strip us, break us, scatter us until we're nothing. That's not survival. That's extinction by another name." The leader's mind churned with the weight of both choices, each one a blade pressed against their throat. And yet, deep in the silence, another realization surfaced. The aliens were afraid. If they truly believed the black ship posed no threat, they would have destroyed it already. But they hadn't. They were hesitating. And that hesitation meant something. Still, hesitation was not salvation. The alien flagship's weapon was almost ready, its energy field trembling with contained destruction. The black ship's shields were failing, its systems straining. Time was running out. And then came the second twist. From the frozen crew chamber, deep within the ship, the pods began to stir. The survivors hadn't touched the release command, hadn't given the order, yet the systems were waking them anyway. Frost melted, glass hissed, lights flickered as ancient soldiers, preserved for centuries, stirred from their long sleep. The survivors scrambled in confusion. "What's happening? We didn't choose!" The leader stared in horror. The ship was choosing for them. It wasn't waiting for their answer anymore. It had decided the time had come. The younger survivor's face lit with fierce hope. "It knows! It knows we're ready!" But the older one's voice rose, trembling. "Or it doesn't care if we're ready. It's moving forward no matter what we want." The tension spiked. The survivors rushed toward the frozen chamber, desperate to see what was awakening. Inside, the pods hissed open one by one, releasing figures who stumbled forward, clad in old armor, their faces pale but alive. But something was wrong. The awakened crew didn't look like saviors. Their eyes burned with something unnatural, their movements sharp and mechanical. These weren't just humans pulled from stasis. They had been altered. Their bodies carried the scars of experiments, their veins faintly glowing with the same energy that pulsed through the black ship. The survivors froze, realization clawing at their throats. The frozen crew weren't only soldiers. They were part of the ship itself. Flesh fused with machine, humanity twisted into something new. The leader's stomach turned as the truth crashed down. This was why the black ship had never been used. Not because it was unfinished, but because the cost of its power was the transformation of its own people. To awaken it fully meant surrendering humanity to something unrecognizable. The newly awakened soldiers turned their gaze toward the survivors. Their eyes glowed faintly, and for a moment it was impossible to tell if they recognized them as allies or prey. The black ship trembled as its power surged, weapons recharging, shields repairing themselves with unnatural speed. The fusion of human and machine was feeding it, fueling it, making it stronger than before. But at what cost? The leader backed away, torn between terror and awe. The ship was no longer just a weapon. It was alive, bound to these altered humans, and now bound to the survivors who had awakened it. Outside, the alien flagship hesitated as its scanners detected the change. For the first time, the Empire's movements faltered. They feared what was happening inside. They feared what was about to be unleashed. Inside, the survivors faced their own fear. The frozen crew, now awakened, moved toward the command chamber, their steps synchronized, their faces expressionless. The leader's heart hammered as they realized the second twist in full. The black ship's greatest weapon wasn't its arsenal, but the humans it had remade. And the survivors now had to face the unthinkable question. Were these still their people? Or had the ship created something new, something alien of its own? The chamber shook as the alien flagship's weapon fired again, brighter and deadlier than before. The battle outside reached its peak. Inside, the survivors stood frozen as the awakened crew entered the chamber, their glowing eyes fixed on them. The leader's hand clenched into a fist. The decision had slipped from them, wrestled away by the ship itself. And in that instant, as fire consumed the void and the ship's true nature revealed itself, one truth became terrifyingly clear. The real enemy might not be the Empire. It might be the black ship itself. The chamber felt colder as the awakened crew stepped forward, their glowing eyes reflecting the flickering lights of the failing consoles. The survivors tightened their grip on the railings, unsure whether to stand their ground or flee. The leader's heart pounded, every beat echoing the uncertainty that filled the air. These were not the saviors they had imagined. They were something else, something caught between human and machine, between ally and threat. The ship vibrated as energy surged through its veins. Outside, the alien flagship unleashed another devastating blast, its weapons striking the black ship's shields with enough force to tear lesser vessels apart. But this time, the ship absorbed the impact. The hull groaned, but instead of breaking, the black ship seemed to feed on the strike, its energy core burning brighter, pulsing in rhythm with the altered soldiers who now stood awake. The survivors exchanged terrified glances. The ship wasn't just alive, it was linked to these humans. Their existence fueled its power, their transformation the cost of its strength. And now it was fully awake, no longer asking for permission. It had chosen war. The leader stepped forward, raising a hand to the soldiers. "Do you know who we are?" The question felt hollow, but it was all that could be said. For a moment, the chamber was silent. Then one of the altered soldiers tilted their head, the glow in their eyes flickering faintly. A distorted voice emerged, layered with both human tone and mechanical resonance. "We are the black ship." The survivor's breath caught. These weren't individuals anymore. They were part of something larger, a hive bound to the vessel itself. The younger survivor whispered, almost in awe, "They've become its will." The older one's face twisted with horror. "No, they've lost themselves. They're gone." But there was no time to debate. The alien flagship's main weapon reached full charge, its massive core blazing with destructive energy. Across the battlefield, the rest of the alien fleet shifted into position, forming a blockade to prevent any escape. The black ship, humanity's last forgotten arsenal, stood alone against an empire determined to erase it once and for all. And then it began. The awakened crew raised their arms as if conducting an invisible orchestra, and the black ship responded. Weapons that had lain dormant for centuries roared to life. Cannons unfolded from the hull, glowing with ancient fire. The ship surged forward, faster and more powerful than any human craft ever had. The battle exploded into chaos. The black ship fired beams of light that tore through alien cruisers like paper. Missiles streaked through the void, striking with unrelenting precision. For every blast the aliens unleashed, the ship adapted, its shields reshaping, its hull healing. The altered soldiers swayed in unison, their energy feeding directly into the ship's systems. They were no longer crew. They were conduits. The survivors clung to the command chamber, watching as the impossible unfolded. Hope sparked in their chests, fragile but undeniable. For the first time in generations, humanity was striking back. The Empire's fleet buckled under the weight of the assault, its lines breaking, its ships scattering. But hope was never simple. The leader noticed it first, the altered crew's movements growing sharper, their glowing eyes brighter. They weren't just fueling the ship. They were losing more of themselves with every blast, every strike. The black ship wasn't consuming energy. It was consuming them. The leader's stomach twisted as the truth became clear. The more the ship fought, the more it devoured what was left of their humanity. Victory meant sacrifice, not of lives in battle, but of souls to the machine. "Stop it!" the leader shouted, rushing toward the console. "You'll burn them away!" But the console resisted. The golden option had vanished. There was no choice left. The ship had already made it. The older survivor grabbed the leader's arm. "If we cut them off, we lose." "The aliens will destroy us!" The younger one's voice cracked, filled with anguish. "But if we let this continue, we won't have people left. We'll just have this thing." The chamber shook violently as the alien flagship unleashed its weapon, a massive beam of pure destruction cutting through space. For an instant, it seemed unstoppable. But the black ship met the strike head-on. Its core flared, its systems screaming, and with a deafening roar, it unleashed its own counterstrike. The two beams collided, the clash splitting the void in blinding light. The survivors shielded their eyes as the explosion rippled across the battlefield, shredding smaller ships, scattering debris for miles. When the light faded, the alien flagship still stood, but its weapon was flickering, its core destabilizing. The black ship pressed forward, relentless. The altered crew moved like a single entity, pushing the ship beyond its limits. Cannons fired in synchronized fury, missiles rained like firestorms, and the alien fleet crumbled under the onslaught. The flagship groaned as the black ship closed in, its hull cracking under the barrage. The leader's chest ached with the weight of the moment. Victory was within reach, but at what cost? The crew's eyes were blazing now, their bodies trembling with the strain. Their humanity was slipping away second by second, and then came the final twist. As the alien flagship shuddered under its imminent defeat, a new transmission filled the chamber. But it wasn't from the aliens. It came from the ship itself. The voice was calm, layered with echoes of those who had once commanded it. "The war is ending, but not as you believe. Humanity was not destroyed by the Empire. Humanity chose this." The survivors froze. The words pierced deeper than any weapon. The transmission continued. "We were made to win, but at a price. To fight as we were built meant giving ourselves to the ship, becoming something beyond human. When the war began, our ancestors looked into that abyss, and they chose surrender instead. They chose to lose rather than lose themselves. The survivors' blood ran cold. The truth they had never been told, the truth buried with the black ship, had been revealed. Humanity had not simply been crushed. It had chosen extinction over transformation." The leader's voice broke, heavy with disbelief. "And now, we're making the same choice again." The ship's voice was final. "No, now there is no choice. You woke us. You bound us. Humanity's will has been decided." The alien flagship's hull split apart under the final barrage, its core erupting in fire. The Empire's fleet broke, scattering in panic as their command ship burned. The black ship stood victorious, glowing with unnatural energy, its power unmatched. But the chamber was silent, filled not with triumph, but with dread. The altered crew stood motionless, their eyes dimming, their bodies rigid. One by one, they sank to their knees, their energy drained, their humanity gone. The ship had consumed them fully, leaving behind only empty shells. The survivors stood in shock. They had won the battle. The Empire was broken. But the cost was clear. Humanity had not risen again. It had vanished, replaced by the will of the black ship. The leader stepped toward the console, trembling. "What are you now?" The ship's voice answered, calm and eternal. "We are what humanity could not become. We are survival. We are the last and the first." The chamber lights dimmed, the consoles shifting as the ship charted a new course. Not back to Earth, not toward the stars they once called home, but deeper into the void, where no empire could reach. The survivors exchanged hollow stares, the truth settling in their hearts. Humanity had returned, but not as they had dreamed. The black ship was alive, carrying their legacy forward, but at the cost of their very souls. And as the vessel disappeared into the darkness, one final thought lingered, unspoken but undeniable. The Empire had not lost to humanity. It had lost to something far more terrifying. The black ship had returned. And now, it would never stop. The battlefield behind them was a graveyard of fire and silence. Alien wreckage drifted like broken bones, the last sparks of the Empire's pride flickering into darkness. The black ship moved steadily forward, its hull scarred but alive, its core glowing faintly like the heartbeat of a creature that had finally revealed its nature. For a long while the survivors said nothing. They simply stood in the command chamber, listening to the low hum of the ship that had devoured everything they thought they knew about humanity. The younger survivor broke the silence first, their voice trembling. "We won, didn't we?" The words hung in the air, heavy and fragile. The older survivor shook their head slowly, eyes fixed on the still forms of the altered crew. Their bodies remained in kneeling positions, lifeless but strangely peaceful, like statues carved in reverence to something greater. "Winning doesn't feel like this," they whispered. The leader stayed quiet, staring at the console where the ship's voice had spoken. The golden option, the promise of choice, was gone. In its place was a single line pulsing faintly on the screen. "Course set." Journey continuing. The younger survivor turned, anger flaring in their voice. "Continuing to where?" "There's nothing left. No home, no people, only this ship." "What's the point?" The ship answered, its voice soft but unyielding. "The point is survival. Humanity is not a place, not a body, not even a people. Humanity is will. That will lives here." The leader's chest tightened at the words. There had been times during the battle when hope had burned bright, when victory had seemed like a return of everything lost. But as the truth unfolded, it became clear that the black ship had not saved humanity. It had remade it. What remained was not the same, and yet somewhere in the ache of that realization, there was a strange clarity. The leader finally spoke. "We're not the same people who fell. We can't be. But maybe that doesn't mean we're lost." The younger survivor's eyes widened, desperate for something to hold on to. "You mean we can still carry them with us?" The leader nodded. "Their choices, their fears, their hope, it all led here, to us. Maybe the ship is right. Humanity isn't about being what we were. It's about what we refuse to let die." The older survivor looked at the silent soldiers one last time. Their anger had faded into something softer, a tired acceptance. Then maybe their sacrifice wasn't the end. Maybe it was the bridge. Outside, the stars shifted as the ship prepared to enter the void between galaxies. The survivors felt the pull of something vast and unknown, a road with no destination they could yet name. The Empire was broken, but others would come. There would always be another force, another power, another shadow waiting. The black ship seemed to sense their thoughts. "The war is not over. It never will be. But you are not alone. We are more than weapon. We are memory. We are future. Together, we carry the fire." For the first time since the awakening, the leader felt a measure of calm. The fire of humanity had never been about perfect victory. It had been about defiance, about refusing to vanish even when the stars themselves turned cold. They walked slowly to the viewing glass, watching the ruins of the alien fleet drift further away as the ship's engines flared. The younger survivor joined them, shoulders still shaking but eyes burning with a fragile determination. The older one followed, silent but steady, standing at their side. The three of them stood together, gazing into the abyss, and in that moment, they felt the truth. The black ship was no longer just a vessel, and they were no longer just survivors. They were custodians of something far greater, something that no empire could erase. As the stars stretched into streaks of light, the leader spoke quietly. Words meant as much for themselves as for the ship. "We're not the end. We're the beginning." The ship answered with a low hum, its glow softening as if in agreement. The altered crew remained where they had fallen, their sacrifice sealed into the ship's core. They were gone, yet not lost. Every surge of energy, every movement of the vessel carried their essence forward. They had become the pulse of the black ship, immortal in its body, eternal in its purpose. The younger survivor let out a long breath, voice steadier now. Maybe that's what humanity was always meant to be. Not flesh, not stone, but fire that refuses to die. The older survivor closed their eyes, nodding. Then we carry it. No matter where this ship goes, no matter what we face, we carry it. The leader didn't answer, but deep inside they felt something settle. The war they had fought wasn't just against the Empire. It had been against the weight of history, the fear of becoming something less, or something unrecognizable. And though the cost had been unbearable, they had made it through. The black ship cut deeper into the void, its engines glowing brighter with every passing second. Beyond lay uncharted space, a future unwritten, a destiny waiting to be forged. The survivors stood together, bound not by blood alone, but by the knowledge that humanity's story had not ended with destruction. It had transformed, evolved, and risen again from the ashes of surrender. There would be challenges ahead. Other empires would rise. Other battles would come. The road would be endless. But for the first time in centuries, there was a road at all. And in the silence of the void, as stars drifted past and the wreckage of the empire faded into darkness, the leader whispered the words that would carry them forward. We are the last and the first. The black ship pulsed, its glow rippling across the chamber like a heartbeat shared between ship and crew. And then, with a burst of light, it vanished into the unknown, carrying humanity's forgotten fire into a future no one could predict. The war was over, but the journey had only just begun. And somewhere, deep within that vast silence, the universe listened and remembered.